They bombed them. These are aid workers. This was a war crime, and they bragged about it with heavy rock music. And when I saw this, I was honestly in shock, and it shocked me more than everything else. A few days ago, I was with a bunch of animal rescuers. The day before, I was with them, the German aid workers mostly, as well as a man by the name of John Jones, a British expat who's been living in Hong Kong, a very friendly man, a very worldly man who had come to Ukraine in order to help out in any way he could. He's an older gentleman, but he still wanted to assist in any way he could on the ground. And the day before, on I believe it was June 13th, we actually helped UA animals in Kherson how to reform an abandoned building into a animal shelter. And it was a lovely time. I mean, it wasn't really, when I say it was a lovely time, it wasn't a lovely time to clean up an old abandoned building. It was still an old abandoned building at the end of the day, right?
Bankrupt man.
But it was nice to do that because the furry and the innocent deserve a shelter, and they deserve to be helped. Actually, here's a picture of one of the little kittens that's now staying at the animal shelter that we helped set up. And the next day, that same crew of people, the German aid workers and John Jones, was going to go out into the water to go to homes which still had animals possibly there, where the owners had to abandon them in
Burns
Kherson.
is an immoral, morally corrupt,
bankrupt man. Rockaholic, thank you so much for the prime. I appreciate it. Owners had to abandon their homes. These people had to abandon their homes because of the flooding, because of the man-made disaster. And I do want to always emphasize that it was a man-made disaster of the Novokakhovka Dam explosion. They had to abandon their homes, and so they had to leave the animals behind in a lot of instances. And so these crews were going to go out and try to find any animals that were still stranded. Some animals, even though a lot of them have already gotten into the city center, they've gotten to better ground, were still stuck in trees. When we were going to the location, there was 2 points. There was a point which was the gathering point, and then there was a point which was the actual drop-off point into the water. When we were going to the gathering point, we saw a team coming back with a cat and a cat carrier, so we saw that there were still animals that needed to be evacuated. We saw them actually present that cat to the owner of the cat, and they were very happy to have their animal back. And so we went to the drop-off, not to the drop-off point. We went to the gathering point. It was me, the German aid workers, and John Jones. Now, a few details before we get to what happened. First off, the boat in question, we got probably an hour to 2 hours.
Burns is an
immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Vankamira, thank you for the tier 1. The boat in question, we got probably an hour to maybe an hour and a half before we actually went to the gathering point with it. So like 4 p.m., 4:30 p.m. Now, mind you, Kherson's shut down, its lockdown, its curfew is at 9 p.m. So by 9 p.m., you need to be home. And by 8 p.m., according to what I heard at the gathering point, you have to be...
Two Dads Smooching gifted 2 tier 1 subscriptions. Damn, I was gonna gift 2 subs, but someone gave me one. Rio well, passing it on. Wide peepo happy.
Thank you, Two Dads Smooching, for the 2 tier 1s. I hope this never gets played at The Hague. That would be extremely embarrassing. Where was I? God, I completely lost my track.
Burns is an immoral.
You guys are really
you
guys are sabotaging me at this point. You guys are purposely sabotaging me. Cat Find and Aim I Like, thank you so much for the primer. Beats over 10 months of gutter chat. So we were supposed to have the boats out of the water at 8 p.m., but we're getting the boat at like 4:30. By the time we get to the gathering point, it was like 6:30, and they got the permit at 2:30. So and you had to be re-permitted for this boat to go out on the water like every single day. And this is a process that the Germans tried to go through multiple times beforehand, and each time they had come up short. But this time, they had finally got the permit. They had gotten a boat that was metal, because you had to use a metal boat now because the water levels were lowering, and there was a fear of like jagged pieces of metal and debris possibly puncturing a boat, and then another rescue team risking their life to go out and help that rescue team, which is stranded because their boat got punctured. There was also a fear of mines. While the boat was not going to, save you from the mines, that was also a fear going into it, that a boat could possibly hit a mine, which has been pushed into the area by the flooding, and that could cause some casualties. Again, a metal boat isn't going to stop that. In fact, I would think actually a plastic boat might be more likely to get over a anti-tank mine with no problem. But that was also a fear going into it. So those are just two disclaimers I had to give you guys, that it was already pretty late going into this operation. And the reason they still wanted to go through with it, even though it was pretty late and we had been told that 2 days before there was tank shelling, and, you know, they were a little antsy to go out so late because, you know, they don't have too much time out on the water possibly. But one of the teams coming back had told us that it was quiet, and that was something that motivated them. And the other thing that motivated them to keep going was the fact that they had already gone through this permitting process and like all the bureaucracy to get out there. Some of the response has been very chaotic. It's not very centralized. A lot of these rescue boat operations, that's one of the main criticisms I've heard from a lot of the teams out there, is that they wish that like the operation was more centralized, and they also wish that the knowing which area was already cleared and what area still needed to be cleared was more centralized, maybe like a grid system that they could use. But, you know, nobody knew the Novokakhovka dam explosion was going to happen that day. Obviously, there was warning from Zelensky's government, like from October of last year, that the Russians could have rigged it to explode. And the New York Times has published a piece saying that the damage in the dam correlates with that. But they're whether or not they should have had something prepared, it kind of came out of nowhere. As in, nobody knew it was going to happen that day, and it happened. And they had to get whatever haphazard response they could get. And so it was somewhat chaotic. And so dealing with that process, now that they've finally gotten to the gathering point, from which is just the last step before being in the water, and they want to go out there and help animals. That's why these German aid workers came from across Germany all the way to Ukraine to help out. They wanted to get out in the water. And so after talking to some locals and them reassuring them that, you know, we're good to go. Of course, there's dangers, but we should be good to go. I think an hour and a half on the water, being back by 8, should be fine. They decide to go out there and go to the drop-off point, actually go into the water. One last thing before we get into it. I was told beforehand, and this is the only thing I was told by the police officers that were in the area and the people that were, trying to look out for our safety, that there was a door I could go into if it started to get violent, if the shelling started, and if anything happened, you know, bombing, etc., I was to run to that door, open it, and go into the bunker. Now, the bunker was the basement of the building, but that was my designated bunker. That was our designated bunker. That's going to be important later. So we go to the drop-off point, and I filmed them, you know, going out into the water, getting the boat out there, this old red boat, which is not the best boat in the world, if I'm being completely honest with you. The propeller was kind of chipped. It looked a little beat up, but we were told that 2 days before it had been used in rescue operations, so it shouldn't have been a problem. But once they had gotten the boat in the water, they couldn't get the engine to start. And there was another boat with it, a white fishing boat, which had locals in it, which were helping the volunteer with the rescue operation. And they were trying to help them out. But when I saw them take out a paddle and start trying to use the paddle to fight against the current while they were trying to turn on the engine, that's when I knew it was a problem. And I was looking at that, thinking about the fact that I could have very easily been in this boat. And I was like, well, you know, on one hand, I kind of wanted to be in the boat for filming purposes, and this kind of sucks that I'm not going to be in the boat. But on the other hand, it looks like the boat's not even working. But at that point, I was called back, like, hey, Dylan, they're going to figure it out. Don't worry. Just come back with us. We're going to go back to the gathering point, and we're going to wait for them to finish up. It should be an hour and a half. That was the estimate I was given. I should also put out there that John Jones, the person on screen now, you can see him right here. He was the person driving the boat. The reason why is he has a history in boating experience. And so they thought he would be the best person to drive the boat, since none of the German aid workers had experience driving this specific type of boat. So that's what John Jones was doing. He was driving the boat, the rescue boat that was going to go pick up animals. So we go back to the gathering point. It's me, my colleague Anthony Bartway. He's a managing editor for New Voice of Ukraine, and he's also a producer of Ukraine Without Hype, which I appeared on that podcast, by the way. So I do recommend you guys go check that out. And it was one other aid worker that was with us, one other German aid worker. And as we were, parking and about to just like sit down and, relax, we get a message that the boat was like broken down. It's not starting, and we got to go back out there to pick them up. It was no more than like 5-6 minutes after we had gotten back that we got that message. So we're like, okay, and we're about to get back into the car, and then I hear like a whistling, and I recognized the whistling enough to make the split-second decision. Thankfully, I was wearing armor and I was wearing, a helmet to get down. And I was on the steps of the gathering point, and I just went face first. And then I heard a very large explosion that was quite close to us. At that point, I tried to run up to the door, which was our bunker area, to open it to be safe. I also hit record on my phone because I'm a journalist. This is supposed to be my job when these moments happen. I want to make sure I document them. And I pull on the door, and it is locked. So I think I should probably show you guys that footage. First off, though, I do also want to, just to make sure you guys know I'm not lying. Not that I think you guys would think that I'm lying. Here's pictures of me sending them off on the boat, for example. As you can see, here's a local helping to guide the boat out the water. You can see John in the driver's seat, just showing this to make sure that, this documentation is public. I'm not just making the story up. I have photographic evidence that these are aid workers going out to water to do aid work, to do rescue operations, to go save animals.
A curd is a curd.
Xanderhall got a tier 1 subscription. I'm glad you're okay, dude.
Hey, Xanderhall, thank you so much for the tier 1. I appreciate it, buddy. And I got your message about you wanting me to come on to talk about what happened to Ukraine, and I'm perfectly willing to. Let me just get through this segment. There's a lot of information to get out there. So at this point, I go for the door, and I try to pull on it. I actually have the footage here.
Side, right?
So you guys can kind of see what I'm going through. A lot of this footage is silent. There's only one explosion in this footage. And the reason why is that I turned off my phone afterwards because one of the people I was with was nervous that we could be tracked by our SD cards. I told them that, hey, it's airplane mode. I've got it. But they were worried enough that I was like, okay, whatever. Just to soothe them, I did that. And I switched to my GoPro, and that footage is now exclusive with Offbeat Research, so I cannot show that. But this is already public. I wanted to make sure I made something public so everybody knew the basic bare bones of what happened. I wanted to make sure that this was public, so I could show this footage since this is not exclusive, and Offbeat has not, asked for that to be reserved for the moment. So I could show this footage of me running to the bomb shelter.
Inside, right?
Go inside. We need to go inside.
It's locked. Motherfucker!
I apologize for my language. I know that sounds like a meme, like considering the circumstances, but I am trying to get better at not cursing in these scenarios. Because if this film is like historically important for any reason, or it could ever be used to like go forward in some like criminal court of like for war crimes or something like that, I would rather the footage not include me swearing.
Why would they lock the fucking door?
So this area doesn't have cover above our heads, but it has 3 walls. So we decided this was the safest spot. This is not the bunker we were promised, but it's more secure than we felt out in front of the building where the explosions were going off. So you can hear a little beep in the background. That's a German aid worker trying to call his colleagues. At this point, he could not get in contact with them. He was extremely worried for good reason. There is like a little explosion later. I don't want to stay on this footage too long because a lot of this is just kind of us waiting here silently for more explosions. 1 second. We could just get to that, I guess. So as you can hear, the explosions were obviously very close. Yeah, sorry, I did this, you know, this video is going to have me at a few points being a little lost for words, right? And so while this was going on, there was something else going on.
We need to go inside. We need inside, right?
I'm going to pause this video. Thank you.
We need to go inside.
Okay.
Inside, right?
Please. Thank you. Yep. Okay. While that was going on, while we were dealing with that and I was going through that process, eventually they would open the door and they would let us in the back door. They would find out that we're there after all the strikes were done, by the way. And we were able to enter the building, which we were supposed to use as a bunker. We get down there and we're still trying to contact the German aid workers. Now, the German aid workers were going through a different experience of being shelled directly by the Russians. Here's some footage of that. This is footage specifically of them jumping into the bunker after the first and second shell had already fell.
Locked. Motherfucker.
Nope. There we go.
Jesus, thank you, Jesus.
Now that's the whistle that I heard, by the way. So if you wanted an idea of what the whistle sounded like, that's what it sounded like. And I can tell you something, that split second between the whistle and the explosion, that like second of silence, the worst moment. I can't even describe it. It is the worst moment. That one of those moments is worse than like a month. Just hearing constant artillery, everything else. It is the worst, because in that moment you're just bracing to, you know, get hit. You're basically bracing to die. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. That is what you're doing. Also, if you listen to this audio, you can see how close the Russian artillery team is to where we are, because you can hear the first explosion of the gun being fired and then the artillery shell landing. Listen closely. That right there, that's the artillery gun being fired. And the second explosion, this. That's the impact. So that just shows how close we are to the Russians, and why the entire time I've been here, Son, it's just a constant sound of artillery. Constant sound. So when you're that close to the river, you're like nose to nose with the Russians. And the reason why the Russians are so close here is because the flooding in Kherson has largely receded. And that's good. Well, it's not good when it comes to the mines, right? And it's also not good when it comes to the Russians being able to move their artillery guns, move their positions closer to the river again. And so now they're bombing rescue operations and bombing the city of Kherson more frequently now that the flooding has receded. Now, it was during these strikes, it was either during the initial strike or one of the strikes afterwards, I believe it was during the initial strike, that John Jones, the British aid worker, was hit. He was hit in two areas. He was hit in the upper thigh, and he was hit in the lower abdomen, which is going to be an area where part of the stomach is. So these are very, 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 very dangerous injuries. The upper thigh one, I mean, of course, there's a risk of bleeding out, but that's the less dangerous injury. The other one is in the lower abdomen, which can very obviously kill you. And here is footage of him being carried in by an aid worker that was with a religious missionary girl from Florida. I'm not kidding you. He was a Ukrainian, but he was working with her in an aid group. Very lovely woman. I'm going to gather her testimony when we produce the full report for this, and the testimony of the person who saved John and helped pull him back as everybody else was trudging through the mud. And let me emphasize something for a moment here. You got to imagine just how muddy the coastline is here after a week of flooding. My feet would go like almost up to the knees at some point, if not up to the knees. I tried to pull up my jeans so they wouldn't get wet, and it was impossible. Almost up to my pockets were wet. And it wasn't because I treaded deep into the water, it was because I sunk. And at certain points, I had to literally tug my leg like 6 or 7 times to pull it out. And that was when I wasn't panicking because I was being bombed. And so these people were trying to flee into this bunker, which is only supposed to support like 8 people, but they got like 12 in there. They're trudging through the mud as these shells are like exploding around you. In the footage that we're going to show later, the drone footage, you can kind of see how muddy the area is. I actually think I don't think I have a proper picture that displays it, but it was very muddy. It was a very, very muddy area. And so one person actually goes out and gets John and brings him in, which we're going to look at that footage here now.
Okay, get up next time. Go down. Come here. You are hit. Сильно ранен. Hello. No.
I just want to make note of this to show how much John is a trooper. He is actively telling the other people to come in with his hand because they're standing outside of the door so they can help him in, and he's trying to wave them in so that they're completely covered by the bunker and they can't get hurt on his behalf.
So guys, listen to me. Listen to me.
In Jesus' name.
John, where you have pen?
In Jesus' name.
Okay.
That's the religious girl, by the way, saying in Jesus' name over and over.
Jesus.
Okay, we have pen.
Thank you.
No, guys.
Very lovely woman. And so at this point, the Russians continue to shell and continue to shell this position. It felt like forever, even though it was only about like 5 or 6 strikes. And that's where they were shelling like this, which we already played earlier.
Jesus, thank you.
And so they continued to shell the position. So at this point, after they had gotten John in, they get a medical evac of some sort. They put him on said medical evac and they try to get him out of there. And remember, this is all while the Russians are shelling this area. They get the medical evac out of there. The Germans are able to get out of there as well and come back to the bunker. The Russians stop shelling and we meet up with them. All this footage, by the way, like the initial reactions, all that, I wish I could show you. I got it on my GoPro, but I again, Offbeat Research, that'll just be released in the future. Not only with Offbeat Research, but also I'm going to be releasing that footage, and I already got the agreement for this, on my own channel. So I'm going to be producing a piece around this. Obviously, I think it deserves the attention, it deserves the work. So I'm going to be trying to produce a piece on this after I release the second part of the Right Sector interview that I already released on my channel. That's when I'm going to start immediately working on this and trying to get it all together. And I'm already working with a few journalists on how to properly do witness testimony and do it in a way that can really build a strong case here against the war criminals, and that's what they are, the war criminals that did this. So they come back to us, we get back together, and the UA Animals people actually come out and evacuate us. They get me, Anthony, they drive us out of there, we go back to our apartment, and that's that. And that was the day of, that's the timeline of events. Now, the next day, I'm already, shaken up a little bit. I'm already, kind of processing everything, and it's very strange. I go over to John, I visit John, he's okay. He's okay in the fact that he's going to live. Obviously, he has injuries. The shrapnel was deflected by his pelvis. He was saved by his pelvis. We were joking with him, like, we don't know if you've drinking a lot of milk and that's what saved him. I mean, this guy's like 60 something pushing 70, right? This is an older gentleman that got saved by his pelvis here. So, I'm happy. I'm very happy that that's the case. If it wasn't for that, there's a good chance he'd be dead. Because there's a good chance it could have torn up his stomach, and stomach injuries in many cases are fatal. So he got very lucky. Many people have asked me if he needs assistance financially, and I've already offered to help fundraise. And I said if he didn't want something to be public, I would be happy to, take all the proceeds of any story that comes from that, like, throw it to him. He rejects all of this. He's like, no, I don't want this. He wants the money to go to, in his mind, more deserving causes, the people who are more in need. He has reserves, so he wants to cover it himself. he was in any way, he was actually saying like, I feel bad for taking up resources at this hospital. So he felt guilty for actually accepting medical treatment at the hospital because he felt like he was taking from the resources that could be used somewhere else. And I was trying to like explain to him, like, if you weren't the one driving that boat, it could have been Anthony Bartway, my colleague. There's a decent chance if he wasn't in the boat, maybe I could have been the boat and one of the Germans would have tried to, you know, even if they don't have the same experience with this boat, they may have tried, or maybe, like, who knows who could have been in there. It could have been a local that was driving and got hit. It could have been any number of scenarios. So I still think he was a tremendous help, and he has also said that he wants to come back.
Glay_of234 got a tier 1 subscription. It's scary to think that things like this are allowed to happen. I commend you for your coverage.
Thank you. I really appreciate the tier 1, and it is crazy to think that things like this are allowed to happen. He says that he, once he heals up, is going to come and do more work in Ukraine as, you know, maybe being, maybe with like some health initiatives with kitchens and stuff like that, more soft work. And I'm not saying soft as in it's not helpful, but like not frontline rescue operations, but stuff that would be of a slower pace, but still incredibly helpful because they need hands to do this work. So he is still devoted and dedicated to wanting to make sure to help Ukraine as much as he can. But I just wanted to say that he's okay. As we were about to leave this hospital, I was sent a video that had 1 like on Twitter, a single like, but my friend sent it to me, and he says, "That looks like your boat. Is this you guys?" And the video he sent me was this. It was posted by the Telegram channel, The Disgusting 8. We're going to talk about who they are in a second. And it is the footage of them bombing the rescue workers as they were about to go out and try to help animals. It actually looks like they were going on the shore and they were done, like, oh, the boat's broken, I guess we can't do any operations today. And that's when they bombed them. You can also notice that it's highly edited. They actually don't, like, you can see the red boat is somewhere else in a moment, like as they do the bomb. It's a little confusing with the editing. I don't know if that indicates something, but this is the footage of them bombing the rescue workers that they posted publicly on Telegram, celebrating it. And not only did they celebrate it, they had fun with it. They wanted to show how cool it was that they bombed these rescue workers by putting heavy rock and roll music over the footage of their war crime. Let's play it. I'm going to mute it now for copyright reasons, but you get the idea. They put heavy rock music over it to show how cool it was. You might also notice that there's a symbol in the top left-hand corner. That rune that is being used was heavily used by the SS and is also very much used in the white nationalists and neo-Nazi community. Just something I wanted to, you know, throw out there, make a note of it for the drone team that recorded this. This was coordinated between a drone team, the Disgusting 8, that is the drone team that you know, gave the coordinates for this strike. And here's a picture of them. Don't want them, obviously you can't really see them, but this is the best we can get for who did it, who did the war crime. If this is all of them, I don't know, but here's a picture of their drone team. And it was also done, the strike itself, not the drone team that identified it, was done by a private military company. Let me actually read the post that the drone team posted on their Telegram channel celebrating this attack, and then we can talk about the private military company that actually did the shelling. Here's what they posted on their Telegram. And here are the boats with enemy infantry. Due to the inability to pass under the bridge, stand near the coast, where the artillery crew of the Levadia private military company is already waiting for them. Bravo, guys. So they're claiming that the aid workers that I again, I need to emphasize this. I have already documented very clearly as humanitarian workers, and this isn't the only evidence I have of them being humanitarian workers, in case somebody wants to say, well, maybe they, they're wearing a costume and this is a special ops operation and Dylan the CIA, I don't know, whatever you would say. But I do also have footage of them loading up these boats with humanitarian aid and stuff like that I will be publishing not only on my YouTube channel, but I will also be publishing with Offbeat Research in the future as we gather all this information, gather witness testimony. So they bombed them. These are aid workers. This was a war crime, and they bragged about it with heavy rock music. And when I saw this, I was honestly in shock, and it shocked me more than everything else. It shocked me more than everything else because I was thinking the day after it happened, in the lead up to when I saw this footage, man, how am I going to build this case? Because, we have a ton of witnesses, we have footage, our case is already pretty strong, but, maybe the Russians will deny it, or maybe, they'll say that the Ukrainians did it to themselves because the Russians have said stuff like that before. Maybe, they'll claim that, nah, they didn't do it, this is completely fabricated, or et cetera, et cetera. But then they posted the footage of it themselves. And not only did they post the footage of their war crime themselves, providing more evidence of their war crimes to us, to the reporters trying to monitor this, trying to document this, but then they added rock and roll music over it to make it seem super cool. And that really bothered me because it's one thing, and I'm used to them doing war crimes and then like, oh, oopsie doopsie, I don't know what happened. I didn't do that. That's all made up. It's all a lie. I'm not as used to, yeah, we did the war crime. Here's the war crime. And let's put some music over it. Isn't it so cool? Aren't we so cool for bombing this elderly man who wanted to save drowning kittens? Which isn't exaggerating the situation. That's literally what it was. They're bombing people trying to save kittens and dogs of little old babushka grandmas from drowning in their homes after they abandoned their homes due to the Novakhovka Dam explosion, a man-made disaster. You can also go see the coordinates if any of this interests you, or you still have skepticism. The coordinates have already been geolocated by Volunteers for GeoConfirmed, which is a pretty reputable OPSEC geolocation group. So I want to give credit to them for not only being the person who actually originally posted this on Twitter and then brought it to my attention to my friend, who then brought it to attention to me, but also for geolocating the area where the strikes were happening.
Occurred.
Oh.
Heretic_soup got a tier 2 subscription. Many war crimes from this conflict will never be known, but at least this one will be. I am glad this could be documented, though I hate that it's necessary.
Absolutely. I'm of the exact same mindset. As for the people who shelled us, I don't have too much to say about them. They are a private military company. So, I mean, if we want to put it bluntly, mercenaries, led by Sergei Oskanov. If you don't know who this guy is, by the way, I totally pronounced his name wrong, but I don't care enough about him. This guy is the head of the Crimean Occupational Authority, meaning he has been appointed the head of Crimea. So like it would be like the governor of I don't know, Georgia or something, a governor of a state. He has been put there by Putin, and he is the head of the occupational authority that is overseeing torture, extrajudicial killings, and all sorts of atrocities. So the fact that his private military company, which is Convoy PMC, would be involved in this and
Burns
would be
is an immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man,
and be working with this drone team to bomb rescue workers is not terribly surprising, considering this man's, human rights record. And I don't personally think he's that interested in saving human lives or trying to be as careful as possible with Russian military strikes to preserve the lives of Ukrainians, to preserve the lives of civilians and rescue workers who are going out there trying to evacuate human beings who could, drown and die, try to get food and aid to people who are still stranded, and also evacuate the animals that could be killed. I do also want to say, once again, that the Russians invaded under the pretext of trying to stop all the people who were dying in eastern Ukraine from the shelling. That was one of the narratives they put forward. They bombed the Donbass for 8 years, and then first chance they get, they bomb rescue workers trying to save drowning cats. I'm sorry if my bias is slipping into this retelling of events, but it's kind of impossible for me to ignore that kind of extremely dreary and dark irony. Dedicated Bach, thank you so much for the Prime being subbed
Burns
for
is
15
an
months.
Immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Andy Keane, thank you so much for subbing with the Prime and being subbed for 15 months. So we know the private military company that shelled us. We know the drone team that identified us. And again, we only know this information because they posted publicly about their war crime and bragged about it. So, what else do I have to say? Not much. The Washington Post is going to be picking up the story. I don't know when they're going to be publishing it. I know other news publications are probably going to be picking it up as well. I've been talking to them for the last 48 hours, pretty much nonstop. And I hope it gets as much attention as possible. I'm happy that, not that this happened, of course, this is a massive tragedy. Scott, I'm not Scott, I can't believe I said Scott. John, I am unbelievably tired. It's been a long week. I still haven't slept. After the stream, I'm passing out. John deserves justice for the injuries that were sustained to him. The people who were terrified by this bombardment deserve justice. And so I'm also going to be talking to my managing editor at Offbeat Research about filing this war crime with any international organization that'll look at it. We're talking about the International Criminal Court, and we're also looking at filing it with the Ukrainian government so it can be on the official record. So it won't only be on Twitter, it won't only be on a YouTube channel, it won't only be on a few news publications, but it'll also be filed officially. So we're working on that. We got to gather witness testimony for that. I still have to have the sit-down conversation about how we go through that process, but that is something that we're discussing right now. We think it's incredibly important. I'm willing to put the work into it. I'm willing to dedicate the time to it, to do what's necessary, give the interviews, give the testimony, put in the legwork. I think it's important. Now, while this, from what I've been told from those contacting me and from those at Offbeat Research and others, this is probably... and I haven't shown a lot of the footage, and a lot more of the footage will even give a clearer timeline, documenting even more stuff, more clearly documenting that these are humanitarian workers. I mean, just interviews with them talking about, hey, I came here to save animals, and the reason I love animals is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as they load cat carriers into the ship, right? It could not possibly be more clear when we eventually release all of this footage. But from what I've been told, this is probably the most documented one of these strikes on the Kherson evacuation workers This is the most documented instance, as in we have the most clear timeline from start of the day to end of the day. All of this process is filmed in some way, documented in some way, documented by drones from the Russians, documented by me, the correspondent on the ground, witnessed by like over 12 people, filmed by the people there. We document clearly that these are aid workers. We document clearly that this boat was being filled with aid equipment before being put on the water. We filmed that being put on the water, showing clearly that these are not soldiers. The whole process is filmed and documented. And so if it is not the most documented, it is one of the most documented. I have yet to see anything else that is as documented at this. So while it's not the first or last instance of this, and when I say it's not the last, I know that's not a hopeful prediction, but I'm just being blatantly honest with you that I do think the Russians will do this again. I don't think them being exposed here or them being shown to be shelling them evidently, like not evidently, but like concretely 100% unrefutably, I don't think that's going to stop their behavior. We've already seen them shell the chief rabbi, well, one of the people who claimed to be the chief rabbi of Ukraine, as he was doing evacuation efforts in Kherson. We know that aid workers and others have been injured during evacuation efforts off of the left bank, the Russian occupied bank, because the Russians have been not doing much to provide aid and evacuation efforts for the civilians that are trapped there. That's why we've seen footage of like drones dropping water bottles to like kids on roofs, just unbelievably just depressing footage. I'm happy that we got this documented. We're going to put in the legwork to make sure that this is recognized, not only in the press, but hopefully in the legal system, or at least within the Ukrainian government, if nowhere else, as a war crime. This is just one of many instances. For every war crime that we can document to this level, there are 10 to 20 that we can't. For everything that we, have a camera recording on, for everything that we have, a phone camera just ready just in time, for every instance that we do capture this type of stuff, there's 5, 10 to 20 instances where we don't. And we've already seen that when it comes to Kherson evacuations. So I went to Kherson under the idea that I would be going there, document whatever I could, and to document evacuation efforts, because I knew that history was being made here, and I wanted to make sure that people saw what it was like during the evacuation efforts, saw how people's lives were affected. I did not know it was going to be like this. I did not know we were going to be facing something so dangerous. I mean, I knew there was danger involved, but I obviously did not know that they were going to so directly target the aid group. It wasn't that I was under any idea that, oh, the Russians are very nice and they're not going to do it. I just, I've been to the front line like on multiple occasions now, and a few of those times we're not actually, I was about to say none of those times we fired upon, but technically we were chased with a drone, and we don't know for sure we were fired upon. Okay, bad example, but I didn't think they were going to be so deliberate in their war crimes on that day, especially since we were being told it was quiet on the water. I didn't expect that this was going to be what I was going to document, that I was going to be documenting a war crime. I thought I was only going to be documenting rescue efforts, but sadly, that was the situation I fell into. That was what I had to do, and I'm happy that at least I was there to document it, because I can only imagine the type of pontification we would see from a lot of armchair commentators if this incident wasn't as documented as it was, about, going into every pixel of this video. And if you look at the original Telegram post, and I really don't recommend you go into the comments because it is so cancerous, but if you look at this video, a lot of them are in the comments like, oh, well, what's that black spot? Is that a machine gun? And, oh, if you look here, oh, well, you can't clearly see red. These are just like, you can barely see anything. You can barely see anything here, as they're trying to pontificate about how these are clearly military personnel. These are clearly soldiers, as they're just parked on the left bank with no discernible weapons or military equipment in a big red boat. Because as we all know, the best way to, engage a stealth operation across the river to build a bridgehead to launch a counteroffensive would be in a bright red boat in brown muddy water. Doesn't stick out at all. Oh, in a white boat on top of that. Not a green boat, not a brown boat, but a bright red boat. That makes the most sense. Oh, a bright red boat that also doesn't even work. Breaks down. The red makes it go faster. Thank you, chat. Very brilliant commentary from the chat. So yeah, that was my week in Kherson. Well, it wasn't my full week in Kherson, obviously. I talked about my other days in Kherson on the other video on DylanBurnsLIVE. You guys can go check that out if you want to hear about that. But yeah, we documented a war crime. This is probably the most important filming I've done in the entire country, if I'm going to be quite frank with you. I didn't expect this to fall into my lap, but it did. And I'm sad to say that I don't think this behavior is going to be ending anytime soon, but I am at least somewhat happy to say that at least nobody can lie about it. Okay, does anybody have any questions?